Hi everybody, this is a response to Undertaker Freak 1127, John that is. Yeah, this is a response to his video called My Problem with Feminists, and he did say in the video he'd be interested in hearing the views from feminists on what he had to say, so I thought I'd chip in. I do appreciate John isn't into generalisation, which I appreciate. He does understand there's different types of feminists, just as there's different types of atheists or different types of whatever else. So I do appreciate that he's not trying to tar everyone with the same brush. But I wanted to pick up on a couple of points he'd made.
In fact, a lot of feminists would be happy to hear that for a long time, I generally sided with feminists. A lot of the things that they had to say, I was one of those people that said, "Oh, men are those greedy, power-mad, avaricious assholes that have destroyed everything green in this world. They cause nuclear war. They manifest destiny, slavery. They're the big, power-hungry, business suit-wearing, you know." And I used to side with them almost exclusively. I used to really identify with their struggle, and I used to always see them as the ones that were fighting for everything, and I used to see them as the ones that were always being beaten down, always being beaten back, always being stifled, always having roadblocks thrown in their way. And I used to say, you know, men, I'm a man. I used to be one of those people that said, yes, I'm a man, but I'm not like them. So I used to be the same way with the gender. But here's where things got different for me. I began to look back at the Industrial Revolution and everything that revolutionized. Well, fuck, it's right in the name, isn't it? And how dangerous a lot of those jobs were, and how much risk a lot of those early jobs took. And even before the Industrial Revolution, when men were out doing the hunting and gathering and women were staying home and all that kind of stuff, all of the inherent risk that was involved with being out there, or being in those factories, or those mills, or those quarries, or those mines, being in these really dangerous, precarious positions. I began to wonder where the feminists were giving credit to men for all that, because I didn't really hear it. I'd hear all about their struggles, all about the suffrage and all that kind of stuff, but never did they really, I mean, any feminists that I talked to anyway, never did I, or read about, I never really heard any credit given to the men for all of the risk and the danger they put themselves in to give us the infrastructure we have today. The cars, the trains, the planes, all sorts of automobiles, the roads that we drive on, the factories that make everything. Yes, there are some, you know, negative externalities like war, nuclear war, and things like that, but the things we have today, there were men taking risks years and years and years and years ago, putting themselves in danger in really piss poor conditions to get a lot of these things in their nascent stages to what they are now, today, fully developed.
What we need to make clear here is feminism is not the belief that men are incompetent, or the belief that women by default would do jobs better than men. Rather, it's the belief in gender equality, and in the workplace this means equal opportunities. That's what it's referring to. A person should not automatically be disqualified from a job because of their gender, essentially, is the point. Work safety conditions improved after women joined the workforce, whereas men are culturally bred not to speak out about dangers, hazards in the workplace, etc. Rather, they should just man up and deal with it. Women were having none of this when they joined the workforce. They insisted upon safety, and that benefited everybody. So, I mean, how's that for an acknowledgement of the risks taken by men?
And that's the thing that always, that over time, it kind of made me question the whole idea of feminism. Well, if it isn't about superiority, it's about equality, you know, equal this, equal that, whatever, fine. But you look at those jobs, and some of the jobs, when I hear a woman say that she as a secretary should make as much as a guy that's working in a coal mine, or a guy that's working highway construction, or working in a wastewater treatment plant, putting himself around all sorts of filth and poop and rats and used condoms and dirty tampons and disease and all that kind of shit. When I hear that she thinks she should make just as much for sitting on her ass in front of a computer, and I'm not saying she doesn't do any work, But when I hear the ones that say that they should have equal pay for somebody that works in a dookie plant, I kind of go, okay, you're sort of missing the point here. Certain jobs obviously pay more because there are more hazards.
Yes, which is essentially the problem with the examples you're using. You're taking female employees and male employees and then throwing them in a lot of factors that aren't gender. Two people doing jobs of equal risk and equal responsibility should be paid equally. That's the argument for gender equality in the workplace.
And that seems to get lost on a lot of feminists as well. So the danger, the risk, the hazard, all those things. Women were not the only ones that had to suffer over time, okay?
Yes, both men and women suffer as a result of patriarchy. That's why opposition to patriarchy shouldn't be considered opposition to men.
A lot of men were slaves. A lot of men were Indians that were having their land taken from them, that were having their villages burned and all sorts of shit like that. A lot of things, while men did perpetuate them, men also had to suffer right along with women.
Well, here we're talking about intersectionality. Men weren't slaves because they were men. They were slaves because they weren't white Europeans. And the same goes for the mistreatment of Native Americans.
The white man was the one who, over time, seemed to have the big advantage.
So again, yes, intersectionality. Now, an example of intersectionality would be, say we've got a woman who experiences less prejudice in her daily life than a man. Let's say we've got these two people. Now, an anti-feminist would look at that on the surface of it and say, right, well, there you are, that debunks feminism. That debunks this whole idea of patriarchy, because here we've got a woman who isn't experiencing a great deal of prejudice, but here we have a man who is. So that's how they look at it. But, however, if we look at other qualities these people have besides their gender, then we might see the bigger picture. Now, let's say we realise that the woman is white and middle class, but the man in question is black and working class. Then we start to understand why he's experiencing more prejudice, because he has two qualities which may, well, more likely in the kind of society we live in, to make him the victim of prejudice, whereas only one that's likely to make him not the victim. Whereas with the woman, it's the other way around. She has two qualities which are more likely to make her not a victim of prejudice, whereas only one that does. So she experiences less prejudice not because she's a woman, but despite the fact she's a woman. And the man in question here experiences prejudice not because he's a man, but despite the fact he's a man. So this is an example of intersectionality. It's where we have to consider all factors before assessing why someone may or may not be experiencing prejudice, how much prejudice someone might be experiencing. That's intersectionality, and it is recognised by feminists, at least the sort of feminists whose articles and things I read. The one in feminists I'm interested in, that's the sort of thing they talk about. Funnily enough, the anti-feminist argument doesn't address that. They deliberately ignore that, because as long as they can provide an example of a woman who isn't experiencing as much prejudice as a man, as far as they're concerned, that makes their argument, and they don't want to have to look at any other factors which might just possibly debunk their argument.
Over the course of history of this world, the white man was the one riding high. But these feminists seem to forget all about the struggles that men have had to endure, only because of what they had to endure, which was bad. Some of the things that women had to go through never should have happened, but that's history. Some of the things that happened to men, they shouldn't have had to go through. But some of the really dirty, disgusting, dangerous, precarious positions men held got things done for us. They chose to do that. Sometimes they didn't have a choice. Sometimes it was to put food on the table.
Well, exactly. They didn't choose. They had to, because of the patriarchal structure of society. The idea of being a stay-at-home dad and of a woman being a breadwinner, that just wasn't an option once upon a time. Nowadays, as a result of feminism, it is an option.
Taking these really dangerous jobs and all of these things to get us where we are today. So that's probably the biggest problem I have with feminism. I could sit here for hours and tell you all the problems I have with radical feminism, but that is radical feminism, just like radical anything. I'm actually eager to hear what some feminists have to think about what I've said. Because I would be willing to bet that there are a lot of people that consider themselves peaceful feminists that never would have given any thought to that kind of stuff.
Well, I hope I've demonstrated otherwise. To recap, feminism improves conditions for both genders in the workplace. Feminism recognises intersectionality, and feminism recognises that both men and women suffer as a result of patriarchy. So, yeah, I hope that's of interest to you. I hope it's been taken as it's intended, not as anything hostile, just as a polite disagreement with you there, or polite response. I hope that's how you receive it. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.